IVM.
BQ Big Decisions, the BloombergQuint podcast that helps you make the right financial choices. You know, the other day I was asking my wife how we should go about financial planning and how to essentially manage our finances. And I was wondering whether we should have a couple of joint accounts and whether we should merge our investments. She said, "Alex, whatever is yours is mine, and whatever is mine is also mine." You know, she was joking at the time, but it got me thinking. While there's no best way for couples to manage their finances together, there must be a few thumb rules to follow. I'm Alex Matthew, and this is BQ Big Decisions. On this podcast, we're going to talk about whether there's an ideal way for couples to manage money and how they can navigate the mine, yours, and ours. My guest today is Mrin Agarwal, financial educator and registered investment advisor. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Alex.
You know, I think that's a great place to start this conversation, Mrin. How do you determine where to draw the line when it comes to your money?
What your wife said is true. What is yours is mine, and what is mine is mine. I follow that myself. So I'm in complete agreement with her, firstly.
Well, I'm glad. And she will be absolutely glad that a financial planner is agreeing with what she said.
I'm saying that more from a personal perspective, of course. But yes, it's always a tug of war.
Yeah.
As is a lot of things in married life, isn't
Yes.
it? But I find finances is one thing that couples don't talk about, right? And many a times it's just assumed that one partner is just going to take it on and just take care of it,
Yeah.
and the other partner doesn't do anything about it, which is the case in my case.
Yeah.
But that's not the case in most other people, because I typically find that it's the men who take care of the finances and the women don't.
You know, very interesting point there. And I was very surprised by this, Mrin, because I did a dipstick in my office, which is, as you know, BloombergQuint. And I was surprised to find that nearly over 60%, nearly 70% of the people who I asked said that their mums were the ones that were handling the finances of the house. So it was actually an eye-opener to me. I have heard on numerous occasions in the past that it is largely the avenue of the man of the house to decide on finances. But this one was a bit of an eye-opener for me.
That's interesting, because typically when I do my sessions, that's not what I find, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And I think a lot is to do with the social structure and the fact that money management is never taught to us. And it's a taboo to really talk about money. So for young couples, I think one is to really talk about it. And by talking about it, you need to figure out how are we going to manage? What are the responsibilities? So the responsibilities are not only paying bills.
Yeah.
The responsibilities are also in terms of how are we going to spend? How are we going to save? And how are we going to invest?
It requires a lot of dialogue, doesn't it?
Yeah, it requires a lot of dialogue, and sometimes, the topics can be very, very touchy.
Yes.
It can get very touchy especially when you have one partner being a spendthrift and one partner being an okay spender, or, you have situation where one of the partners is supporting family. So in these sort of cases, I found that it can get very, very, very touchy. And
I get what you're saying, because everything that we do here on BloombergQuint with regard to personal finance, we clearly state that there is no one-size-fit-all solution. And I'm sure you stand by that as well. And it comes down to a few things, right? If we're talking about relationships, we're talking about personality types.
yeah.
That would have a bearing on how people function with regard to their money.
Oh, absolutely. I think two things. One is what they have seen when they were growing up in terms of how money was being managed. And two is their own personality in terms of how they would like to manage their money. So, I see a lot of people who are very happy to just live on EMIs, right? Because for them, they need they have their wants and needs, and they need it even if it means taking out an EMI. And I've also seen people who are very averse to debt and who want to be completely debt free to the extent that they don't even have a credit card. So I've seen both the spectrums and money personality.
You're saying that is bad as well?
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to be so. I'm not saying, so if you don't want to take loans, that's fine. But I find this thing to say that I'm not going to own a credit card to be a little too
excessive.
Yes, too excessive, because I always believe it's good to have one for emergencies. I mean, all I tell them is, okay, don't use it. Use it only if there's an emergency at least. Right?
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
But you were talking about personality types and you're talking about...
Yeah. So again, each one of us has a very different money personality. And I think just like other things in our marriage, we need to come to a common ground on money. So in terms of how the money is going to be managed, I think we really need to talk about it, come on a common ground without really being judgmental. And I know it's very easy to say it and it's very tough to do.
It is.
But yes, you will have to find that common ground.
You know, I was speaking to my wife about this, and I mentioned that right at the start of the conversation. And from a wide gamut of advice available on how two people should manage their money, I picked one, and I've been told that it's a little complicated. Maybe you can weigh in on this. But what I realized is that as a couple, we have a certain number of expenses. So I have a separate account, a joint account that deals with only expenses. I split it in two. At the start of the month, when I get my salary, I put a certain amount in that, and she does as well. And all the expenses are spent from that account. Similarly, I know that a certain amount of my money has to go towards investments. We split that into two. And at the start of the month, as soon as our salary comes in, we put it into an investments account, which is a joint account. And everything that's remaining remains in our savings bank accounts, and we can spend it the way that we see fit. That's a fair way to go about it?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's a great way to go about it. But I find that not many people are going to get around to doing what you've done, although it is the right way to go about it.
Is there another way, or, you know, is this the best way that you can do it?
So if you really can't get around to doing this and being disciplined about it, right? I think one of the things is to firstly have a budget, and within a budget have a discretionary budget, because most of the money fights do not happen on things like rent and groceries. You know, the money fights really happen on those discretionary spends, and which is where people accuse each other that you spend more and you spend more. Yeah. So I think, you know, in terms of figure out, okay, this is our take home salary. And I always advocate the 30-30-40 rule, which is 30% expenses, 30% EMIs, and 40% savings.
So you are talking about your net income pooled between the two individuals and saying 30%, 30%, 40%. So 30% for expenses.
Yes.
30% for EMIs. Okay.
Yeah, and 40% for savings.
Okay.
Now, within that 30% expenses, figure out what is it that you're going to do on discretionary spending and use that accordingly. So I think that's a good way to take care of this spending issue that's there with most couples.
And I know that a lot of people will wonder when you're saying 30% on expenses, and why is that so low? But I must point out that obviously in this situation, if you are not paying an EMI, it's assumed that you are living on rent. And so therefore the rent, especially in a city like Mumbai, which is a large amount of money, would come out of that 30% for the EMI, right?
Yes. Okay,
that's
right. That
more or less takes care of that.
Yeah.
So that's a good thumb rule to follow, 30-30-40.
Yeah. And of course, I think the other thing is to have a money date. I think you should spend 1 hour on your money every month. In the beginning of, you know.
A lot of couples will say they don't go on enough dates without talking about money, you know, and you're talking about a money date here.
You can do it at home. You don't need to go out for it. Although I think it'll get a little contentious to do it at home. Yeah. So I think you should actually go out for your money date, because it's easier to talk about it when you're surrounded by other people.
Wow.
Right?
Okay. So listener, do try that out and let me know what you think about that, and then maybe I'll give it a go. Okay. So, but you mentioned this at the top of the conversation, and you said that there are sometimes in that tug of war, pull and push, there is this one individual out of the couple that takes the financial decisions, you know. And I've met a lot of people out there, Mrin, who say that they just couldn't be bothered. that their partner is taking all the decisions and they're more than happy that will just continue forever. But that's not a healthy practice.
No, it's not.
Why is it not? And how should one remedy that?
Well, it's not simply because, as I said, that each person's approach to goal and the goals are really different. And I think to really remedy that, you need to first of all jointly figure out what are your financial goals. So as I said, if you have a financial goal of buying a house, it needs to be detailed further in terms of, okay, where, how much is it going to cost and stuff like that. And you need to come onto a common ground to understand that financial goal, and then really look at drawing up a financial plan, or at least do some bit of goal
So that's
planning.
what you discuss on the money date.
Yes.
And not anything else, guys. All right. But let's take a step back. Okay. We're talking about couples who sometimes meet for the first time. They're focusing on things that are, I would think, and let me just put it this way, facets of their prospective partners' personalities that are perhaps much more attractive than their money and their investments, right? So, but it's still important to share that information. Do you think that somebody should be forthright at the start and be transparent about, their finances? In certain cases, large amounts of debt.
Yes, I think you've brought in a really important point. I think it's so important to be open about what your financial situation is. As you said, that when you're courting each other, these are not things that you would want to talk about. I do think that it's important for people to be honest about their debt. And I mean, the last thing that I don't think too many people want to get into a relationship which has too much of financial baggage. Let's be honest about it.
Yeah.
So I think it's very, very important to be open. The other thing from a woman's perspective, I've found many times that women don't like to bring up money matters because they are then considered money minded. And I think they really need to say to hell with it and say that, no, I mean,
It's
for
important.
my own well-being, I'm going to talk about it.
Okay. Where does planning for a child come in? Because, and the reason I asked this, Mrin, is that I'm coming across more and more young couples who are saying that, yes, they do want to have one child or two children, and they've, pretty much decided the number that they want. And second, they've already started thinking about starting to save for that child that they haven't yet decided to have. So they say that at some point in the future, we've gotten married or we're just together at the moment, 4, 5, 6 years down the line, we might have a child, but they've already started saving. Is that the right approach? Is that too early to start, or is there never too early to start?
Well, it's never too bad to save. I mean, if you don't end up having a child, you can obviously use the money for something else. But it's never bad to save, right? Now, if they're actually saving for something that's going to happen in the future, I think that's a good thing. And there's really nothing wrong with it.
But should you do it?
If you can, why not?
Okay,
but I think I don't know if it's very easy to do it.
It's not.
Given
necessary.
your salary levels and given the expenses, as you said, for example, rent itself is a very big part of your expense these days.
But out of the 40%, I'm saying you're advocating that cumulatively from your joint salaries, 40% you're setting aside, which is, I would think, a really large amount of money.
Yes, it is.
And contextually, of course, relatively speaking, it is a large amount of money. Because I've heard people going anywhere between 20 to 40%. So you're being more conservative. I noticed that.
Yes.
But having said that, within that 40%, you can perhaps allocate a small amount of money because there are large expenses that are involved.
Yes.
Bringing up a child.
Yeah.
Now, what if I have a listener who is tuning in, who is sitting with his lovely wife or who is sitting with her lovely husband and wants to put their financial lives in order? Can they follow a few very key steps? Just sitting down with a pen and paper and listing down a few steps.
Yes. So first and foremost, we talked about the 30-30-40 rule on budgeting, right? The second thing is that you need to build up emergency cash for contingencies. So that's typically 6 months of your expenses kept aside in an instrument which is easily accessible. It could be a fixed deposit. It could be a liquid mutual fund.
And you can work up to that, because even that is not necessarily easy to achieve.
Yeah, you don't need to start with the 6 months right away. You could start with, let's say, 2 to 3 months and then look at building it up every month. Of course, the next thing that really comes is planning for the risk on your life. So take the right amount of term cover, which is only covering the risk of your life and not really giving you an investment return.
This is a very important point, because it's very difficult, I think, in the early days to start thinking of the decisions that you make as affecting not just yourself, but the person who is living with you.
Yeah.
So you need to start thinking more in terms of a family rather than an individual.
Just yourself, yes. And of course, you need to check your medical covers. If you're employed and if your organization provides you a cover, please take that up, because there's so many people, so many HR folks who tell me that people don't sign up for the medical insurance because they believe that it's an expense and they all want to have more cash in their hand. But remember, these are good benefits that are being offered by organizations. So if you are salaried, it's a good idea to take up the medical covers. If you're self-employed, you certainly need to take a medical cover, because if you were to have an illness or you have to be hospitalized for whatever reason, it's really expensive these days. It is. And medical inflation in India is more than 10%. So it's really expensive to fall ill.
Okay.
So it's good to have a good amount of medical cover as well. And then you need to, of course, start planning your investments. The common goal that everybody needs to plan for is retirement. And I know you're going to say, oh my God, I've just got married and you're talking about retirement.
No, but it could be a good thing, right? I mean, if you've got married, or if you've started living together, you can say that, in 20 years time, we're going to take early retirement and see the world.
Absolutely. That could be a good plan, starting point.
Yeah, it can be a good plan.
Yes, it can. So certainly you need to think about how you're going to save for retirement. And for young couples, I would say, your retirement is going to be, even if you do an early retirement, probably at least 15, 20 years away. So certainly look at investing in equity mutual funds for your retirement goal. And then, of course, plan for other goals that you might have in the short term, like maybe buying a house, although it's not really essential these days, right, to own a house.
Yes. A lot of people are going the other way. In fact, one of the earliest conversations we had on BQ Big Decisions was, should you buy a house or should you rent? And, there was no clear answer.
Well, I always feel buying a house is an emotional decision.
It is.
Because at the end of the day, if you're buying it on loan, the interest that you pay is
huge. Yeah.
Is huge. It's almost equivalent to your principal.
And that was exactly the point that was raised at that moment as well. But talk about it, essentially, is what you're saying.
Yes, talk about it. So think about what are your other short-term goals. I think one of the other things in today's context that you also need to bake in is, what is your plan B? So, for example, if you get laid off, or if you decide to become an entrepreneur, obviously you need money to start a business.
Yeah.
So, what is your plan B? Or for whatever reason, if one of the partners is not able to work, for whatever reason it is, what is your plan B today? And I think there needs to be a lot of focus on that, because I see a lot of people who don't have a plan B in place.
And that's a scary situation.
That's very scary, because, for example, if you got laid off, you don't have an income coming in, you don't have emergency cash to fall back on, but you have EMIs going on.
Yeah.
So certainly need to have a plan B, that if one income were to stop, how are you going to manage?
Yeah. All right. What about taking on debt? You mentioned, and you spoke about, the taking or the buying of a house on debt. But what if somebody does make that decision and says that we want to buy a house, we want the security that gives us? There is a situation where you have to decide which of the two takes the loan, right? Because I've seen in several instances you have banks that offer a slightly better rate of interest to women who are borrowing. Is that something that they should decide based on what is on offer?
Yes, and I think the ideal way to do it is to just take the loan jointly. Maybe the first applicant can be the woman because of the favorable loan rates. But I think the loan should always be taken jointly. And of course, the point to remember is that if you do want the tax benefit, which is Section 24 on interest paid on home loan, the co-applicants must also be the co-owners of the property.
Yes.
So keep that in mind when you're buying the house, that you also have holding in a similar pattern in the title deed.
Yeah.
I think in terms of debt, one of the other things that you really need to focus on is unsecured loans, because I think today this issue of personal loans, credit card loans,
0% EMI,
0% EMIs, these loans that you get on the e-com company websites and all of this, I think this is a really big issue today, especially among youngsters. And I think that is something that really needs to be tackled. So if both of them together, or if one of the partners is having very high amount of unsecured loans, I think they need to put down a repayment plan. And if it means cutting back on lifestyle expenses, then they should do it. Because at the end of the day, if you have too many unsecured loans, you're not going to get the home loan for sure. And also, it can get in a lot of stress in the relationship. Certainly the partner who doesn't have the loan is going to feel a little annoyed, with that sort of a situation.
Yeah.
And it also hampers your overall lifestyle and, your well-being. So I think, you really need to put a repayment plan on the unsecured loans that you have.
We've spoken about several aspects, but the one aspect that we didn't speak about, Mrin, is the care that one would expect that you would give to your parents. And it doesn't matter that you're not doing it immediately. The expectation is that you would do it at some point of time. So is it that the earlier you speak about this, the better it is?
Oh, absolutely. I think one of the key things is to really match expectations in all aspects. And it's always taken for granted that the man's parents are going to be taken care of.
Yes.
But as far as the woman's parents are concerned, that's something that's really not taken for granted.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to have this conversation, even though the really taking care part of it could come many years down the line. But it's so important to really match expectations and be very clear about how are you going to do it. To that extent, I would also suggest that some portion of money, and this is really if you believe that you will have to take care of your parents, you should be allocating some money aside towards their expenses as well.
So yeah, when you sit down, ladies and gentlemen, when you sit down with your partner and you decide your common goals, do put that in as well, is what Mrin is pointing out. But I think, Mrin, we've covered most of the aspects of financial planning when it comes to couples. Thank you so much for joining me on this conversation.
Thank you, Alex.
Well, dear listener, it's been a pleasure as always, and I do hope that this conversation has helped you out. If you would like to share some thoughts about what we discussed today, you can reach out to us on any one of our social media platforms and we'll get back to you. Thanks so much for listening. This is BloombergQuint.
If you enjoyed Big Decisions, check out some other podcasts on the IVM Podcast Network. You can check out Paisa Vaisa, hosted by Anupam Gupta, Advertising is Dead, hosted by Varun Dugirala, the Ronnie Screwwala podcast, hosted by Ronnie Screwwala, or Cyrus Says, hosted by Cyrus Procha. These shows are available on the IVM Podcast website, app, or wherever you get your podcast from.
Janice, what do you think couples did before TV was invented?
I don't know, go for walks on the beach, long drives, fancy dinners, have more sex maybe?
But what did we do when we decided to move in together? We debated between the Chromecast and the Fire Stick.
We gave up on sleeping early so we could stay up watching true crime shows.
We got ourselves 3 cat babies.
And basically became the cutest couch potatoes around.
Okay then.
In case you guys still haven't got it, we are a TV crazy, Netflix loving, binge watching Mr. and Mrs.
I'm Anirudh Kuha.
I'm Janice Sequeira.
And if like us you snort TV for breakfast, lunch and dinner, this is the podcast for you.
Tune in every Thursday on the IVM Podcast app or wherever it is that you get your podcast from. This is
Mr.
and Mrs.
Binge Watch.
Filter coffee is a fascinating beverage. You need to pick the right beans, blend them in the right proportion, roast them to perfection, and slow brew at the right temperature to get the perfect cup. Which is exactly like great conversations as well. You need to track down the most interesting minds, get them into their zone, and settle down for an unhurried, unscripted chat. And coffee for me is always, always, always best enjoyed with friends. I'm Karthik Nagarajan, and do share my table as I meet some of the most interesting people I know and sit them down for a strong cup of coffee and an even stronger conversation. Join me every Wednesday for a freshly brewed episode. This is not frappe. This is the Filter Coffee Podcast.